Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Gardening for Birds. Hi, I'm Camille Thomason, Tarrant County Master Gardener. And Gardening for Birds is going to show you first some birds that you might attract to your yard, and then some plants that you might use to do that with. I have a handout, and it's posted online. If your phone or device can read the QR code, that'll take you straight to the handout. If that's an issue, the actual link is listed down below, and you can copy it down and go to that website, and it'll have the handout for you. This same slide will be at the very end, so if you don't get the address or the QR code at the beginning, you can pick it up again at the end. Right, how do you attract birds? Well, one good way is to create a brush pile. Brush piles are attractive to birds because they provide shelter, some insects to eat, and maybe even a place to nest, depending on the type of bird. Longer grass, we tend to like really short, manicured, golf-looking lawns, but the birds don't like those. If you want to attract more birds, let it grow a little bit longer so they can hop around and peck for insects. Have a water feature. Be sure if you make a water feature, make it shallow so that you won't drown any of your little birds or water friends. And if it is a little deeper, be sure you put a rock or something in the middle so they can have a place to escape too. Avoid herbicides and pesticides as much as possible. About 30 years ago, I used pesticides and I didn't have any frogs or lizards. I didn't have very many birds, didn't have much of anything. But when I quit using those over the last number of years, I see all sorts of critters now in my yard that I didn't used to see. The insects come and they can eat them and they're not damaged. Nesting houses are a fun way to attract birds, but different nesting houses attract different kinds of birds. So as you are selecting nesting houses, do a little research and look up what type of house is required for the kind of birds you're trying to attract. I know I have a friend who does the Western bluebirds, and she says the diameter of the hole in the front has to be a certain size, and they have to face east or the birds tend not to get in them. So who knew? Put up feeders. But again, research is important because you want to put the feeder up that serves the kind of food that attracts the bird that you're interested in. So do some research when you're hanging up feeders and putting up birdhouses to attract the type of birds that you want to come. And finally, if you grow more native plants and other bird and pollinator-friendly plants, you'll do a lot better job of attracting not only the birds, but the butterflies and insects and things that they'll eat. Pollinators, like the bees and the butterflies, if they'll come to your yard, pretty soon you'll have the birds hot on their heels. The resources that I used to create this PowerPoint, one of the best ones that I found was the National Audubon Society resource. The address is on your page here, but it's also in the handout. So if you have the handout, you'll have this address. The Audubon Society website is really cool because they let you type in your zip code and list plants very specifically for your zip code. And moreover, they list what birds those plants attract. And that's really cool. I use this very extensively in creating this. Another helpful database is the Native Plant Society of Texas, and their database is just what it sounds like. It's a lot of the native plants from the Texas, and you can look them up by our area. And the native plants tend to attract more of the birds than a lot of the things that we find at the nurseries. The Texas Smartscape plant lift was originally created just for our area, and it has things for our area. And I think they've added also, seem like the El Paso area or somewhere now, but it has a lot of things for our particular zone and growing. And the plants were selected because they are generally lower in water use and help encourage less runoff. And finally, the Audubon Society was extremely helpful. I didn't have pictures of all the birds that I wanted to put in this PowerPoint, and they were kind enough to allow me to use some of the ones that they have access to. Their address is on the screen there, and you can get to them. They also, their bird list helped me select which birds to show you in this presentation, things that are likely to be found in our area. Some terms that I used annual. That means you have to replant it every year, with things like impatiens, for instance. Reseeding annuals are things that tend to come back next year from seeds, like cosmos and larkspurs. Perennials, they come up every year from the roots, and some of the most common ones are things like Mexican petunias and echinacea. Short-lived perennials are things that come back, but they don't live forever, like wallflowers, an example. And I think Dusty Miller works that way. They'll be pretty good for several years, and then without any good reason, they all die out and you have to start again. And deciduous, that means whatever it is loses its leaves in the winter, like a pecan tree. Okay, first I want to show you some pictures of what birds you might expect to find in your yard if you use the right plants. The most common bird in my yard is cardinal. I have lots of cardinals, and cardinals are lots of fun to watch. Warblers, these are 3 warbler pictures. The one on the left is the yellow warbler, and the 2 on the right are the yellow rumped, and it's also called the Audubon's warbler. And you can even see his little yellow rear end spot in the bottom picture. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the most common hummingbird in our area, and I don't have a whole lot of luck getting hummingbirds to my house, but most of my friends really do. The hummingbird in the bottom left looks like a ruby-throated hummingbird. It isn't actually, it's actually a broadtail, but they look the same for us normal people to spot. The Carolina wren, these 2 pictures, notice I put photo from Fort Worth Audubon Society, FWAS. The pictures that aren't mine are identified for who I got them from. And if it doesn't say anything, I did it. Northern mockingbird and the brown thrasher are 2 also very common birds in our area. Carolina chickadee, and my dad's favorite bird, the tufted titmouse. White-eyed vireo. You see this white circle around the eye in the picture on the right? Yellow-bellied sapsucker, flickers, downy woodpeckers, and red-bellied woodpeckers are all common woodpeckers in our area, and all pretty. We have crows and all sorts of blue jays. Sparrows, there's a number of sparrows in our area. I have 2 on this page, white-throated and white-crowned. And then the Lincoln sparrow, the chipping sparrow, and the lark sparrow are all in our area. The house sparrow is by far the most common sparrow at my house. And I did put both a male and a female, but you probably got the same at your house too. Waxwings are a lot of fun. They come down your street in droves, and there'll be a big bunch of them, and they'll get in your trees and leave, deposits all over the ground, because what they do is they go down the street and they'll just clear off all the berries on all the bushes on the street. You'll hear this racket in your front yard, and you'll look out the front, and your holly bushes and holly berries are being devoured by 100 cedar waxwings. And when they get yours finished up, they'll move next door and work on whatever's available there. But you can see them coming down the street sometimes. They're tons of fun, and they're beautiful birds. House finches, we also have purple finches, and the one on the left there is a goldfinch, which isn't a true finch. If you notice its bill, it's very different from the finch bills of the other three pictures on the page because it's not a true finch, but we call them finches anyway. Then we have dark-eyed juncos, red-winged blackbirds, and brown-headed cowbirds. Robins are very common up in where I live at my house. And I had to put this picture in that's on the left. Look at that. It's a mama robin trying to feed a bat to her babies. The poor babies have their mouth open as wide as it'll go, and that bat's still bigger than she can get in their mouth. She ended up having to, dismember the bat to get it to her babies. My cousin took that picture. I think that's so cool. Other common birds, the eastern bluebird. We have mourning doves. We have great-tailed grackles, lots of those. Love the painted bunting picture. And we also have the ruby-crowned kinglet. You can see the red on the top of its head, and a blue-gray gnatcatcher. Those are cute. Okay, now what do you do to attract some of these birds? This is going to be a list of flowers, shrubs, trees, and other things that hopefully will attract some birds to your house. This is the columbine. We have a native Texas columbine, blooms yellow. I have one in my backyard, and that's where these two pictures were taken. You'll notice the picture on the right. The tree behind the columbine is a great old big pecan tree, and the columbine is on the east side of that tree. So it gets the morning sun, but it's blocked off from the west sun. So it loves that spot and makes lots of baby columbines that I get to give away every year. The critters that like the columbine are the purple finches, hummingbirds, indigo buntings, all sorts of birds that like insects, and pollinators. I'm going to have a screen like that pop up on each one of my pages, and I won't read them to you each time. I'll leave that up to you. The Turk's cap is another popular plant. The picture on the left is from the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens, and you'll notice how much red you can see in that picture. The Turk's cap blooms red normally, and there's a lot of red blooms, and that picture was taken in the sun. The Turk's cap down in the perennial garden gets full sun most of the day. The Turk's cap in my yard doesn't get very much sun. It still blooms, but not near as much. So if you want a lot of Turk's cap blooms, put it in the sun. Coneflower or echinacea, my mom always called them pink daisies, and I'll probably call them that the rest of my life. It's a perennial. It reseeds and comes back up, as well as comes up again from the roots. And they'll grow in full sun, but they'll also grow in partial shade, not big shade, but partial shade. They bloom early in the summer. I have friends who say they cut them back and they get some additional blooms later. I'm usually too lazy, but what can I say? Coreopsis is either an annual or a perennial. You can get both kinds. It's a pretty flower. They're generally yellow. They do pretty well. They like full sun. And they have a whole host of things that enjoy Coreopsis. It says deer resistant. I wouldn't bet my bankroll on it. If their deer are hungry, they'll eat them anyway. Gay feather. I love gay feather. It's beautiful. If you want to see some gay feather, there's a great big field of it down at Dinosaur State Park that blooms, in the gay feather season. And there's some more up at Lake Ray Roberts, and it's on the park that's on the north side of the lake. And it attracts butterflies like crazy. I showed a couple in this picture. There's on the far right is a Gulf fritillary, and then there's a hair streak you almost can see. He's laying sideways, so he's hard to spot. On the left is a monarch, and it's a male monarch. If you don't know how to tell the difference, the male monarch, if you look at it closely, you can see two little black dots, one on either side of his abdomen, and the lines that are sort of the veins are thinner than the female. So if you have one with dark veins and no black dots, you got a female. The gay feather also attracts pipevine swallowtails, and on the right, on another gay feather, at the top is a fritillary, and underneath him is a buckeye. I mean, they're both trying to slurp on the same flower at the same time. Inland sea oats is a perennial. I got my start by seeing some in somebody's house and grabbing a handful of the oats and throwing them down in my yard and stomping them in. They like shade. They won't grow in the sun. They'll sunburn. They reseed readily, so put them in a place where you can control them. Otherwise, they'll tend to spread into the rest of your flower bed. They will grow in some sun, but not full sun. They get really pretty oat heads on them by midsummer. These I took when I made this presentation, which was several months ago, and so they hadn't gotten the heads on them yet. But the oat heads are really pretty, quite showy, and come up from seed the next year. Milkweed or butterfly weed is a perennial. A number of the butterflies really like this one. So it's pretty in your yard and it does like sun. A bunch of different birds and butterflies like this flower. Notice that it is a host for monarch butterflies. So if you want to attract particularly monarchs, grow some milkweed. Here's another type of milkweed. Antelope horns are really unique looking. They are a perennial. They do reseed. And again, they are the host plant for monarch butterflies. Goldenrod. You don't normally think of it as a yard plant, but it's actually quite popular with butterflies and therefore birds. On the right is another gold fritillary, and on the left is a viceroy. The viceroys look a lot like the monarch, but they aren't. But they do look a lot like them. The goldenrod likes full sun and will spread by seed, by the way. The Texas aster is another beautiful perennial, has lovely blue, purple colored flowers in the fall. The picture on the left with the wonderful show is from the Dallas Arboretum. Picture on the right is from wildflowers taken along the side of the road. Lantana. There are two kinds of lantana. You can get it both as an annual, and usually the solid yellow ones are annuals, or a perennial, like the multicolored one down at the bottom with the bee fly sitting on it. So depending on which kind you buy, it might be an annual or a perennial. Sometimes the nurseries are good and have signs that tell you the difference, and sometimes they don't. So if you ask a knowledgeable nursery person, they might tell you if the sign doesn't say. Firewheel or Gilardia or Indian blanket, those are all the same name. And they are reseeding annuals, as well as there are kinds which are also perennial that come up from the previous year's roots. They do want full sun. They will spread, but not in a way that's a big nuisance. So they are fairly well contained, and they bloom around midsummer, late June, and early July. Greg's mist flower is really a lovely flower. It's beautiful. The butterflies and other pollinators just love it. This happens to be a queen butterfly on the one on the left, but is always covered with lovely blooms, and they bloom a long time. They attract pollinators and butterflies. But there's another one, the blue mist flower, which is also called a wild ageratum, that looks virtually the same. And I don't know how much this picture is, it's not dark enough, but I had to put it in there. Look at all the butterflies on there. You can see queens. There's a fritillary down in the front. There's a black swallowtail up on the left, and several others I didn't even attempt to name. I see a hair streak, and this bush was a big wild ageratum bush, and it was covered with, I bet there were 100 butterflies on that bush. It was amazing. I'll have to confess, I saw this bush down in South Texas at the Rio Grande State Park near McAllen. Pollinators and butterflies adore it. Spiderwort, that's a really nice plant. I have that in my yard. Do get some additional ones from reseeding, but not enough to be a pain. So it's a nice one. It's a perennial. It comes in both the dark bluish color and the pink. It does like full sun, so don't put it in the shade. Passion flowers. My mom had those growing on her fence when I was growing up, and it was almost always covered with butterflies and therefore birds. And this happens to be a Gulf fritillary butterfly. It is a vine. You do need a place for it to grow, and it will come up from seed, and it can be a pain if you get too many up. So put it in a place where you can kind of control it. Dill, fennel, and parsley are wonderful attractors. These plants are the host to the black swallowtail butterfly. And what the black swallowtail do is they come over and they lay their eggs on them, and then the eggs hatch, and they eat these things until they're nothing but sticks. It's wonderful. These little bitty tiny caterpillars you can't even see get on them. And as they grow, they'll end up being the size of your little finger. And they're gorgeous caterpillars. Your dill, fennel, and parsley will be stripped to the bone, but normally it comes back and gets ready for the next crop of caterpillars. So I have this growing on the side of my house. It's in partial shade, and it does well in partial shade. And every year almost they get stripped to the bone and come back happily for the next round. This is on the right is the caterpillar that is the black swallowtail caterpillar. And they're really cool looking. They have these horn things called osmeterium that show up only when they're frightened or threatened. Most of the time you don't see them. They're kind of tucked in. And the black swallowtail butterfly on the left is actually on thrift. I didn't have a picture of one on the fennel, parsley, or dill. Mexican petunia, they come in pink and this kind of purpley color. They are a perennial. They do reseed. There are two kinds of Mexican petunia. As far as I know, they're both called Mexican petunia. One is low growing. It gets, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches tall. It's pretty well mannered. It does reseed, but it doesn't take over your flower bed and if you blink your eyes. The taller one that gets about 15 to 18 inches, beware. That will take over your flower bed. So I urge you to stick with the shorter version. It is well mannered, it looks pretty, and it's not near as voracious in taking over your beds. Scarlet Gilia, this is a biennial. That means it comes up one year and then it blooms the next year. This one, it's also called skyrocket, and you can kind of see why. That looks sort of like something exploding out. And they are a really very attractive scarlet flower and attract a number of birds and butterflies. This is bee balm or bergamot. This is a perennial, but it does reseed. I haven't grown it in my yard, so I don't know how aggressive it is, but it does attract a lot of pretty butterflies, then attract the birds. There are a number of different kinds of sages. Most of them are perennials, and they attract lots of pretty things. There's a fiery skipper butterfly on the one on the left. This is another page. This happens to be the pinker and redder sages. And the moth that you see is called a hummingbird moth. Those of you who are gardeners for vegetables are probably familiar with the hummingbird moth, whether you know it or not. The hummingbird moth is the moth stage of the tomato hornworm, that giant green worm with the big old horn on its back end that eats up all your tomato vines. This is the lovely moth stage of that very damaging caterpillar. Old-fashioned garden phlox. I got this start from my mother-in-law, who got it from her mother. You can't buy it in most nurseries. You have to get it from a friend, or maybe some of the nurseries that sell old-fashioned plants. You might try there. There are more modern phloxes, but the old-fashioned garden phlox is really lovely. It blooms almost all summer, gets about 4 feet tall, and it likes full sun, but it'll grow in some shade. This is an eastern tiger swallowtail that's on it. The John Fanick phlox is one that you can buy at nearly every nursery in the spring. It is a perennial, and again, it attracts butterflies. It is shorter than the old-fashioned garden phlox. It will also grow in partial shade, but likes full sun. Both of those phloxes will spread from roots and from reseeding. All right, let's look at annuals. There's a lot of annuals that you can buy that work. The Dallas Arboretum had a beautiful bed that had red begonias. Red is a particular color that is much more attractive to the pollinators. Larkspur. I have some that comes up every year in my yard. They come in white and this purpley blue color and also pink. It is a reseeding annual, and it likes full sun, but it will grow in partial shade. The Mexican hat is a reseeding annual. Comes in different colors, depends on which ones you like. Lots of things are attracted to it, and you see a lot of it growing wild along the side of the road. It is a wildflower that's very common in Texas. Sunflowers, they are reseeding, and you'll notice the one on the left there has an orange sulfur butterfly right in the middle of it. Morning glories, they come in the purple color, a bluer color, and kind of a pinky color. And they need something to grow on. They're a vine. So I like to have mine grow over my holly bushes in the front flower bed. That works for me. The queen butterfly is very fond of the golden crown beard. It has other names in other parts of the world. The brown-belted bumblebee is lit on one on the right, and this likes full sun. Black-eyed Susans. Nearly all of these annuals like full sun. Some will also grow in some shade. This one has a large list of birds that enjoy this particular flower. When the flowers go to seed, if you don't deadhead them, they will eat the seeds. If you deadhead them, they'll come up from the seeds. I think I said that backwards. If you don't deadhead them, they will come up from the seeds and the birds will eat them. If you deadhead them, you won't get any up the next year. Painted lady butterflies are very popular with the cosmos. The cosmos flowers. My mom bought some cosmos from Sutherland's lumberyard, umpteen jillion years, in a seed packet and planted them. And they were lovely. They were 15 to 18 inches tall, and they had lots of butterflies, and they were yellow, gold, and orange. The next year they came up again, they reseeded, and some of them were 15 to 18 inches tall, but a few of them got 5 feet tall. They bloomed later, and they were great big. The year after that, even more of them got 5 feet tall. And then the next year and the years after that, more and more of them became really tall. This is my front yard with cosmos from all those seeds that got 5 and as much as 10 feet tall. And they started blooming in all orange, and they bloom late, like in August and September. But they are covered with bees and butterflies. And I even had to rope them up to keep them from falling over. They were so tall. You can weed them out in the spring. If they're not blooming by the end of June, they're going to be the Jolly Giants, as I call them. So if you like Jolly Giants, get you some Cosmos seed. It's called bolted. When the seeds don't hold true, that means they bolted. And this is a front yard full of bolted Cosmos. Zinnias are very popular with the monarchs. It's an annual. You can buy them at all your nurseries. Okay, trees. There are a few trees that birds tend to prefer. Pecan trees, nice and leafy. In the spring, my pecan trees don't have leaves, and I can enjoy looking at the birds. But once they leaf out, I can hear them, but I can't see them. Shumard red oak, bur oak, and blackjack oak are 3 popular oaks in the DFW area. The bur oak, by the way, is one of the giant acorns, so you might not want to plant that over your driveway where your car's parked. Pecans will make dents too, by the way. I can tell you from experience. All right. Redbud tree, you can get them nowadays in different colors, pink, purple, and white, but the birds enjoy all of them. Mexican plum trees, it's a native that you can find out growing out in the wilderness. I don't know if you can find one to buy at a nursery or not, but you can find them in clumps growing along side of the road sometimes. They attract a number of birds, and a lot of them like to nest in there. And then the birds who like to eat fruit, like the mockingbirds, will get in there and eat those plums. They like them. I have reservations about giving you these trees. The mulberry, the mimosa, and the hackberry, they are not recommended by Tarrant County Master Gardeners and make a big mess, but they are loved by the birds. The mulberry tree, birds love the berries. And by the way, humans do too. They're delicious. The mimosa tree, hummingbirds and pollinators love the blooms. And as a kid, I grew up at a house and we had mimosa trees, and I loved them. They branch widely. So as a kid, you can climb them and you can get all the way up and find you a nice, comfortable spot to sit for hours and read your library book. And they are short-lived trees because they are widely branched. They tend to break. After 15 years, you chop them down and put down another one. But I loved mimosas growing up. The hackberry tree, it is the only host plant for the hackberry emperor butterfly. So that's a reason in itself to grow them. If you have a big place where you can grow them and they're out of the way and don't interfere with the main part of your yard, these trees all have pluses. Shrubs. There are a few shrubs that are particularly attractive to pollinators. And if they attract pollinators, they attract the birds. These are azaleas from my backyard. If you have black dirt, you probably don't want to plant azaleas. I have black dirt and I have azaleas, but I dug out all the black dirt and put in pine bark mulch and other enrichments to put them in. And then I planted them. And about every 10 or 15 years, I dig them all up and redo the dirt because the black dirt just takes back over. Our black gumbo does not make them happy. They'll live 2 or 3 years if you buy them, but they'll eventually all turn yellow and kind of croak. What can I say? Hollies are attractive. They have flowers that attract the pollinators and berries that the cedar waxwings adore. Tropical hibiscus, it's a small shrub. They're not winter hardy. You have to replant them every year, but they attract the pollinators and hummingbirds. American beautyberry. This is a gorgeous bush. It grows wild. There's a huge bunch of them up at Lake Ray Roberts. There's a trail that I named Beautyberry Trail. That's not what they call it, because it has just arches of American beautyberries growing across it. And they have these gorgeous berries that birds like. You can see a long list of birds that like those berries. The coral bean or cardinal flower, it's a shrub, or some people call it a small tree, but they get beautiful blooms on them and they attract the birds. Okay, I want to thank Audubon Society for letting me use a lot of their pictures. Thayer Birding gave them permission to use things for educational use, so they were able to also grant us use of those. And then photos from my cousin Nancy and a friend Ginger Basin, another master gardener, and master naturalist Kaki Cunningham. And anything that wasn't labeled, I'm guilty of taking those. Here's the handout screen again. You can use this QR code or the address at the bottom to get your handout. Okay, Dick, that rounds it up for me. Have you got some questions? I think you went to sleep.
No, I'm awake. Only got a couple so far, and if you want, you raise your hand and I'll unmute you, and you can ask her some other questions if you want to. Debbie says, I understand pollinator attraction to flowers, but what is it about flowers that attract birds?
Mostly it's the things that, number one, the things the flowers attract, like the pollinators, the bees and the butterflies. Those are attractive to the birds. But a lot of the flowers make seeds that the birds like. I saw Jay not long ago in my impatiens, and I think he was eating the blooms, the dirty bird. And so the flowers, some of the blooms are edible. Different birds attracted to different things, but flowers tend to attract birds. And just pecking around in them looking for insects is a bird thing.
Are there any of these flowers that play nice with each other, as in they work well in the same bed?
Probably, but I'm no expert on that, so I can't speak to that very well. I have most of these just kind of all mixed up in my yard, and that seems to work okay. But you're going to have to judge some of those that reseed. Do be careful where you plant them. You don't want them to take over. Like put them in a place, for instance, inland sea oats be great in an island in the middle of your yard. And then that way you can just mow around them and keep them in control. And some of the other things are good that way too, so that you can mow around and then you don't have to pull up weeds.
Okay, those are the only two that were posted in Q&A.
Okay.
Wait a minute, here's another one. How did you become so knowledgeable on birds and butterflies?
I don't know. I'm just interested in them. And I walk around, and John and I'd go camping and I'd take pictures. Part of the camping experience was walking around taking pictures of the wildflowers and the birds. And then I ended up buying 3 zillion books to look them all up to try to figure out what they were. And from that, as I would figure out what they were, I started keeping a record of it. And I keep a PowerPoint database. I keep one for wildflowers, one for birds, and one for butterflies. And that helps me identify them the next time I see them.
Very impressive that you do all of that.
I enjoy it.
Let's see. You mentioned some late blooming flowers. What flowers in your yard bloom earliest?
Let's see. The azaleas are the first things up. And sometimes I plant some bulbs that come up, like tulips, which are only good for 1 year. But I have a lot of narcissus and daffodils and jonquils and other bulbs that come up in the early spring and bloom. And they do attract the pollinators, which then attract the birds. So those help. Larkspur bloom early if you can get some larkspur seeds. They like full sun, but they'll grow in partial shade. And the birds like the larkspur because they like pollinators and butterflies again. What else comes up early and blooms? Echinacea is not too late. Trying to think. I'm kind of blank at the moment. Go to your nursery and see what's blooming early. Get a good look at from the nursery. That'll give you some help.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, wait a minute. Here's some. Let's see. What are your favorite local nurseries, especially for some of these hard to find plants?
I don't know if I can give a nursery name. I'm not sure I'm supposed to do that. But look for a nursery. The chain nurseries do not always hire people who are locally knowledgeable. Look for a independently owned nursery and go ask them questions and ask. And when you do it for several nurseries, you'll find out which ones have answers which are good for our area. Some of the big box type stores tend to bring in plants like I know certain big box stores buy plants for Texas. Well, give me a break. Texas has South Texas, the Panhandle, us, West Texas. The plants for Texas idea just doesn't work because our state is too big and too wide. So go to a nursery that you think is independently owned and ask questions, and you'll find one in your area that has good answers, and then go there.
Okay. Christina says she lives in a condo and can't grow her own garden. Where do you recommend she go for good birding?
My husband and I used to go to a lot of the local state parks. Also, you can find birds along some of the city parks in Fort Worth and the bike trails, the nature center, which is not far out of town, 20 miles or something like that, 17 miles outside of town on the, what would that be, northwest on Lake Worth. That's a great place to go. The birding groups from Fort Worth Audubon used to go to some of the plants where they recycle water for Fort Worth because they have great big ponds and you see a lot of birds there. Benbrook Lake, there's a state park, Corps of Engineer Park at Benbrook Lake. There's parks on nearly all the local lakes. Mineral Wells State Park has great ones. Lake Ray Roberts. Just look on your map at all the local state parks and go try them out. Depending on the season, different ones have different kinds of birds, and you'll have a great time looking at all the different ones.
There's a comment, Eco Blossom Nursery has a lot of those plants that you mentioned.
Oh, okay, good. Which part of town is that?
Yeah, Monica, where is that located? She hadn't answered yet.
Okay, she may have checked out already.
Yeah, you may have.
Have to look it up online.
You have favorite pollinator bird flowers for container gardening?
I really don't have much in the way of a container garden, so I'm not sure I can speak very intelligently to that. Nearly everything I've got's in the ground. So I'll just have to suggest you might do a little bit of research or even call the Tarrant County Master Gardener hotline and see what they can give you information on that.
Yep, we can help them with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's all the questions I see. You just covered everything so well.
Yeah,
right. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? All right. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming.